Hello, it's Kareem Habibi from Keeper's Nursery. Today is the 26th of May 2024, and today I'm making a video about the juvenile phase in seedling apple trees. So, as you can see around me, I've got about sort of 600 seedling apple trees growing. These are mostly openly pollinated pips that I've planted into these 3 litre pots, so they're doing very well. So they were germinated in the winter time, planted into bigger pots in February, and then in March I planted them into these 3 litre pots in this glass house, and they're doing astonishingly well. So some of these are well over 50 centimeters tall, which is great. So the juvenile stage is the stage when a tree like an apple tree is it's immature. It's not actually going to produce any fruit, so none of the wood is fruiting because the tree isn't going to perform any sort of it doesn't want to. It's so small still. It's not in that phase where it actually wants to pass on its genes to the next generation. It's sort of just trying to grow at this stage. It's trying to get as big as it can. So if you imagine trees in the wild, they they don't tend to sort of fruit or flower in their first few years because they're just trying to compete and grow. So they might spend many years in the sort of understory, growing amongst the sort of weeds under the brambles. Once they reach a certain height and they're sort of big enough, that's when they put a lot of energy into growing sort of seeds and fruit, because it does take a lot more energy to produce the fats that are in seeds than it does to just, the carbon that's sort of in leaves and growing and just getting bigger. So it does make sense. So an apple seedling that you plant isn't going to just immediately want to flower and fruit. So as an apple breeder, that's a bit annoying because that means you have to wait a few years until you're actually going to see, is this seedling that I've planted actually any good, or is it just going to, is it not worth keeping? Because let's be honest, out of these 600 seedlings I've got around me here, I'm not going to keep half of them. I'm probably not even going to keep sort of 90% of them, but I suspect sort of 10% of these at least will be worth keeping. And then, there are going to be some very exceptional seedlings amongst here. There are going to be some that are completely pants, but I don't know the difference right now. Looking at them, they all look very similar. Apart from knowing sort of what the pollen parent is or the seed parent, I can't really tell the difference. A few of them might sort of immediately stand out by being sort of more susceptible to mildew. There isn't any mildew in here right now because there's no rain, so the fungus can't really spread. But once they're growing outside, I'll show you in a bit in this video, which I am editing. That is really all you can tell at this stage. Now, the juvenile stage, you want to sort of speed that up as much as you can so that you can get to the fruiting stage, which is where you can start sort of, you know, reviewing and sort of testing the apples and seeing which ones are actually better than others, and that might even take a few years. And the juvenile stage for a seedling, if you leave it, should be sort of in the region of up to 10 years. I haven't actually planted seedlings and just left them alone. I grub those out, and actually, what to speed it up, you can uh, chip bud, or you can graft the sort of the seedlings that are in these pots onto a rootstock like M9, which actually reduces the juvenile stage, and therefore, you might be getting your results within about sort of 3 or 5 years, as opposed to waiting 10 years, which is great because, let's face it, no one wants to wait 10 years for the same thing if they can just wait 5 years. So that's all good stuff. Now, the juvenile stage is also visually quite obvious. So I've been growing apple trees in the nursery for the last sort of 15 years, but I've been around apple trees all my life. And the first thing that I noticed when I did plant pips in the ground and grow them is that the leaves and the wood look very different. So the habits of these trees are very different to um, apple trees we were growing. So basically, domesticated apples that have reached their fruiting stage. You can actually tell by visually what the difference is in. So these seedlings here don't, to me, look anything like. Well, I mean, like, I know that they're apples. Obviously, I'm not. They're not that strange, but they don't look like. they don't look like if I basically grafted if in half of these pots, if I had grafted let's say Falstaff, or if I planted grafted Brayburn or something, and they were the exact same height, they would look very different. Now here in my hand is I think it's probably hidden rose or something. This is a twig I've just snapped off. This is a shoot even. I've snapped off one of the cordons outside. So this immediately to me looks very different. I don't know if it's how obvious it is on the video. Um, you get kind of thicker, glossier leaves on sort of mature tree wood. The leaves are neater. These leaves on the seedlings tend to be have slightly more serrated edges. They tend to sort of be, well, these are quite big, but the ones growing outside, which I'll show you in a minute, those tend to be small. And one of the big difference is on this one, where the buds are, sort of the dormant buds underneath each, well, above each leaf stalk, those are mostly dormant in, well, nearly all of them will be dormant still. And that's on this hidden rose stem, stalk even. So those are all dormant, which means that I can use those for grafting or budding. And it basically means you get a sort of neat looking tree where the new growth is just single stems. Now on all of these, nearly all of these I have to say, but I'll show you outside how many more in their second year, these buds are actually growing into shoots. So a bit like when you grow a tomato, you actually have to sort of prick these out. I'm not pricking these out on this, but it is interesting that basically you get a sort of bushy, sort of quite wild looking seedling. Now the reason for this I don't know for sure, but it does produce, and these grow completely horizontally as well, and some of them end up as spines. I suspect it's sort of there to protect the sort of center leader, because you sort of end up with spiky sort of outward growth, and that's going to prevent sort of maybe a herbivore, like let's say a deer that's browsing, from actually breaking the, snapping the main trunk. It's going to effectively, they might eat the leaves, but especially if those are spines, a bit like if you have a damson, a lot of damsons will also have sort of these buds during the same year of growth will actually grow outwards, and those will sort of terminate after a short period in a spine. um, that is there for protection. So why? So these seedlings are slightly feral in a weird way, and they don't look normal at all. So this juvenile stage isn't just sort of like just the fact that it doesn't fruit. The tree actually does a different thing at this stage, and then it transforms sort of after a few years into quite a sort of civilized apple tree. Um, and at that stage, it does actually flower as well. So this young stage is a bit weird. I will show you what these look like after 2 years, because it's more exaggerated. Some of these are just sort of stalks which look quite sort of harmless. These are quite big actually, to be fair. If the seedling was growing outside, competing with, everything else that's growing among, wherever that pip's fallen, they're going to be much smaller. So it's quite important to be defensive. This is quite an artificial sort of environment where basically there's no wind. They're getting all the water and nutrients they need handed on a plate to them from me, by me even, and they're allowed to grow as straight and tall as they like. So hopefully, and also when you can grow them straight and tall, you can reduce the juvenile stage as well, because these are going to reach a sort of maturity where they think, hey, I'm the king of the forest, so I'm just going to start producing fruit because I'm doing so well for myself. So anyway, I will jump outside and I'll show you something else of seedling apple trees. So this row here on the left, which is sort of overgrown with grass, these are all seedlings, just like the ones in the barn. They were planted outside last March. That would have been March 2023. At that stage, some of them were already sort of 1 or 2 years old. And since then they've grown quite well because I was irrigating them outside, so they've put on lots of growth. But interestingly, like I was saying, where all of the nodes basically formed into branches in that sort of same year, and they've gone completely horizontal, which creates a very sort of shrubby, strange looking, sort of adolescent bark looking apple tree. Now I suspect these are for protection, because if you see here, it's quite hard for a browser to get into the, attack the main stem of this tree, because there's so many horizontal branches sticking out. I mean, they might go after the leaves, but these are quite sort of spiky as well. Some of these do suffer from mildew. It's been a wet year, so it's quite important at that stage to sort of, some of these seedlings aren't going to be suitable. So these are quite sharp down here, some of these spines down here. So yeah, at this stage they do look very strange as apple trees. These don't. So if I was growing 2-year-old, so if I had 2-year-old trees growing in the nursery, which they would basically just be single sticks going upwards. Some of them would be feathered maidens, but maidens don't tend to be so bushy. And this isn't because I've pruned them or anything, this is just naturally how they grow. To get a maiden to become that bushy, you'd have to cut the top off, you'd have to cut the leader, and then all the nodes up to a certain point would branch out, but they wouldn't be short branches. Now these nodes here, the tree almost knows that these nodes aren't worth anything. It's not trying to sort of compete with the leader. If you cut one of the maidens, like if you bought a maiden from me and you cut the maiden's leader off, you would get several branches that would all try and compete and grow upwards. These aren't doing that. These are just growing outwards for protection. They're sort of trying to possibly smother everything below them. They're also just protecting their main leader, I suspect, from getting damaged by a deer or something. So it's quite interesting to see that. And these all do look like they're still in the juvenile phase. There are one or two that are showing signs sort of at the top of the tree. You can see the leaves look slightly glossier and better, but down at the bottom of some of these you still get these dinky little leaves, and these don't look anything like, I mean, they are apple leaves, but they look very different to anything that I'm used to seeing. And on these trees here, these are seedling apple trees growing these are seedling apple trees that were grafted onto M9 in August 2023. Now these leaves look very strange to me. These are still juvenile leaves. You can see some of them very, very sort of spiky little things. They look sort of very feral and wild, and these will still be in their juvenile stage for a few years to come. So I'm going to show you now what the seedlings look like after, gosh, how many years are they now? So 7-8 years. So I will show you my seedling collection, and those leaves do look normal. See you in a bit. So here we are amongst some more seedlings that have been grafted onto M9. Again, this looks very feral to me. These don't look anything like sort of mature fruiting leaves. So in comparison, this is a tree that was grafted at the exact same time as that one. The leaves look I mean, these are just mature leaves. They look exactly the same as this one, this hidden rose that which I've snapped now. So it's not to do with the age of the tree. It's not like the seedlings will sort of all seedlings show. Sorry, it's not like all grafted trees show those sort of strange leaves to begin with. They will show exactly the leaves of their sort of what they're cloned from. It's just that at that early stage, when it's still in a juvenile stage, that's what it looks like. And if you then find that tree when it's sort of 5-10 years old, the leaves will look exactly like this as well. So I'm now going to show you the collection where those are. Those sort of, I think they're about 8 years old now, those seedlings. Now finally we are amongst all the seedling trees. Now these were, I think they were grafted around sort of 2018. I could be wrong, 2017 or 2018. So they are quite mature now. Most of them have fruited. So amongst them, here are some that are fruited. They're obviously mature enough to fruit. And as you can see, the leaves are more or less as they should look. So for example, this looks exactly like a mature leaf. They do still have the sort of symptoms of being seedlings down below, where you get lots of these horizontal branches, but the wood at the top is much more upright growth, which I suspect is where the juvenile stage has sort of come to an end, and these seedlings are now, you know, mature fruiting trees. You know, for example, this wood, that branch sticking up, you didn't see, there weren't any branches of that type on those sort of short shrubby sort of seedlings I showed you earlier in that row outside. They didn't do any of that. There was no sort of competition for the top where lots of different branches were all doing the same thing. Mostly it was just short, stumpy, horizontal sort of growth, and I suspect that was more for protection. So most of these, as you can see, are doing quite well. Some of them obviously show signs of, it has been an extremely wet year, but some of them show signs of mildew susceptibility, which isn't great, but I'm not planning to keep these. I have grubbed lots of these trees now where the gaps are, where I've just thought, okay, over the last few years they've performed relatively poorly. I'm not sure there's any reason keeping these trees. But then some of them where I've sort of staked them, this is the original Hamid's red pippin tree, which funnily enough hasn't fruited much this year, because last year it had a bumper crop, which was actually quite poor tasting as well, I have to say. But it's not fruited well this year, but I have loads of others growing now, so I'll have plenty of fruit to try. But some of them where I've staked them, there's a high value to them. That's the Bethan tree. This one next to Bethan, blimey, it's got a lot of mildew, so that tree's worth taking out. I'll put that into my notes as to what, you know, is that tree worth keeping? Probably not if it's going to get mildew. Scab resistance, I don't know, you know. I'm not scab resistant myself. I get scab, so I'm not as fussed about scab resistance, because scab resistance doesn't exactly, it's not a wood disease. Mildew actually goes into the wood and infects the wood. Scab is just, you know, the leaves look a bit rubbish and the fruit can look bad. If it's really susceptible to scab, it's not suitable for growing in the West Country. But I'm not as fussed about scab, really. It doesn't affect too much of the tree. Mildew is quite a big problem. So anyway, these are now looking all healthy. I will keep trialing these, but I will have, there's only about 150 trees here. I've got approximately 600 seedlings growing already out there, which some of them I showed you, which were all on M9. And then I've got all the ones in the barn right now, so that's another 600 or so if they all make it to that stage. Nearly all the grafts took last year, which is good. You know, I'm professional, so that's as I suspected. But yeah, it's interesting. Anyway, I hope you've learned something about the juvenile stage. It is a sort of very sort of strange phenomenon that I was not aware of up until I planted some seeds and grew them. It's a really sort of unusual thing. You sort of suspect, oh, okay, if I plant a pip in the ground, it's just going to look like an apple tree and behave like an apple tree. No, the pip actually, when it's in this young stage, it's actually sort of fighting for survival, and then once it's comfortable, that's when the tree thinks, okay, now I can sort of grow in a different way, and I can flower and I can fruit and I can waste my energy doing that instead of just surviving. And I'm sure also there's something else going on in the roots, but we can't really sort of dig up these seedlings and have a look at them. But most seedlings, when they're planted, there's a big taproot trying to go down, because that's sort of the most important thing. But anyway, hope you've enjoyed this. Hope the editing actually looks half decent as well. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.